Welcome back in. Welcome back in. So today we're going to be discussing some of my favorite players you should be looking to buy ahead of week 7. We're almost halfway to the fantasy playoffs, which is crazy, but here we are. So whether you are 6-0, 5-1, 4-2, or you've had a rough go of it, I think there's players in here for everybody that you look to buy to help your team. So, and also, if you have any questions, any trade questions or anything like that, or how you can improve your roster, be sure to leave them in the comment section below. And also hit that like, subscribe button. Let's get into it. So starting off, let's talk about Bijan Robinson. And this is probably going to be one of the more expensive players that you could look to buy, but I don't think it's going to be as much as what he was entering the season. On the year, he's playing about 72% of the snaps, but only 48% of the RB rush attempts, which is mainly because of Tyler Algier, and then 73% of the routes and an 18% target share, which is elite. But he hasn't scored more than 20 fantasy points since week 2. He is 13th in yards after contact per attempt, 5th in missed tackles forced, 9th in elusive rating, but 22nd in yards per route run. He has the 10th easiest remaining schedule for running backs, and the fantasy playoffs is even better. They get Carolina, which is an elite matchup, Indianapolis, and Chicago over the final 3 weeks of the fantasy season. So while you won't be able to buy him cheap, I do think his value isn't as high as he was. And so I do think he is something that you can go out and look to acquire. Next up, let's talk about Isaiah Pacheco. He continues to fly under the radar. There hasn't been a ton of buzz about him, and I think that's incorrect. On the season, he is playing 55% of the snaps, but he's handling 70% of the rush attempts and 40% of the routes. Now, the positive is we're starting to see him be utilized more in the passing game. Last week against the Broncos, he played 63% of the snaps, but he also saw a 16% target share in that game with 6 targets. So I do think Isaiah Pacheco is continually taking more and more of this backfield. We're not worried about Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and Jerick McKinnon just really hasn't been as involved as people thought he was going to be. And I think this is a big positive for Isaiah Pacheco, and I think he can be a top 10 running back rest of season because he's been ultra efficient as well. He's 9th in red zone touches, which is another thing that people were worried about him, that Jerick McKinnon was going to take all the red zone touches from him, and that just hasn't been the case. And he's also 5th in yards per route run, 7th in yards created per touch, and 17th in breakaway run rate. Now, he did start a little slow the first couple of weeks of the season, which contributed to his 14.5 fantasy points per game. However, since week 3, he's averaging almost 18 PPR points per game. And also, a feather in his cap, they have the second easiest remaining schedule for running backs over the rest of the season. So this is a great time to get in on Isaiah Pacheco, and I don't think it still should cost as much as what it should for how well he's played. Next up, let's talk about Jerome Ford. There's been a lot of talk this week about Kareem Hunt and that he's taken over the backfield. Just not true. Jerome Ford is still the 1A within this offense. Week 6, Jerome Ford played 51% of the snaps, 52% of the rush attempts, 35% of the routes, and 6% target share. Now, Kareem Hunt played 37% of the snaps, 36% of the RB rush attempts, and 32% of the routes. Ford has been an RB2 or better in every game since week 1, and he's also 7th in yards after contact per attempt, 22nd in missed tackles forced, and 31st in yards per route run. I think Kareem Hunt is still going to always have a role within this offense, but that's fine because most of these backfields are committees anyways. But he's still the 1A of this backfield. And if people are starting to think that Kareem Hunt is taking over the backfield, and there's a lot of buzz going on around this, I don't think it's going to cost a lot to acquire. And with the way the running back position is this year, it's been kind of a dumpster fire. I want running backs like this who can supplement my team. It's not going to cost you a lot. And at the very least, he is a flex option for you. And they also have the 15th easiest remaining schedule for running backs. So next up, let's talk about some of these other guys. And these are guys that are going to be much cheaper to acquire, whether they're kind of throw-ins. I don't think it's going to be a lot to acquire. So let's start with Roshan Johnson. Should be available this week after missing week 6 due to his concussion. Khalil Herbert is set to miss the next 3 weeks while being on IR. And Roshan has been solid in with a limited workload. He is 15th in true yards per carry and 18th in yards per route run. Foreman was pretty mid this past week against the Vikings with 15 carries for 65 yards. I think Roshan Johnson steps right in week 7 and takes off. And Roshan Johnson was one of the better running back prospects coming out, and I think now this is the time for him to really take off. So I do think Roshan Johnson could be a guy that everybody's talking about after this week as a buy, and I think I want to get in early before his value really takes off. Next up, let's talk about Jaylen Warren. Continues to play a significant role within the offense, handling 45% of the snaps, 30% of the RB rush attempts, but a 16% target share. And in PPR formats, that's really what we care about the most. He has been pretty solid, an RB2 in 3 of the 5 games that he's played, and has been a top 36 running back every single week of the season. He's been extremely efficient, 3rd in yards created per touch, 15th in breakaway run rate, and 2nd in yards per route run. So I do like getting my hands on Jaylen Warren. Jaylen Warren is a strong buy, and I really wouldn't be surprised if he takes a little bit more and more of this back. It's never going to be something where he's handling 70, 80% of the touches. You have Najee Harris still there, and he's not just going to completely take over Najee Harris. It's just not going to happen. But I do think he is going to continue to have a sizable role within this backfield. And as long as he's continuing to be efficient, he is going to be a useful flex option for everybody on a weekly basis. Next up, let's talk about Javante Williams. Now, his value couldn't be much lower than what it is right now. I'll admit, Jaleel McLaughlin has played very, very well so far to start this season. The issue here is that this could end up being simply a three-way committee between him, Samaje Perine, and Javante Williams. But Javante looked really explosive against the Chiefs on Thursday night. He ripped off 51 yards on 11 carries. Now, this is a bet that Javante continues to get more healthy and explodes in the second half. This is a zero risk investment. These are guys that I would like to try to buy because you didn't draft this guy. You don't have that opportunity cost baked in with him anymore. So if you were able to buy him on the cheap, I think this is a good depth piece that you could buy. And if he doesn't work out, it's not going to hurt you because you don't have to give up a lot to get Javante Williams. So Javante Williams is somebody I am looking to buy because there is zero risk involved, but a very high reward if he does hit. Lastly, some honorable mention guys. Dameon Pierce is in the very same similar light as Javante Williams, just not as much in the way of somebody in front of him. Devin Singletary did handle a little bit more of the work this past week and was more efficient, but better days are ahead for Dameon Pierce. A lot of the times, if you've watched some Texans games, you will see that almost always there is somebody in that backfield coming after him as soon as he gets the ball. And so the good news is this offensive line should be getting healthy. The Texans are on bye this week. And so after this week, I think you can see this offensive line be even more healthy. And I think that's good news for Dameon Pierce. And the Texans do have a very favorable rest of season schedule, a top 8 running back rest of season schedule. Tyjae Spears, Chuba Hubbard, and Ramondre Stevenson are the remaining guys that I really wouldn't mind buying. I don't think they're going to cost you as much, and I think they could pay off over the second half of the season. Let's move over to wide receivers. So let's start off with Brandon Aiyuk. While he's coming off 2 mediocre games, Aiyuk underlying numbers have been excellent. He's 6th among all wide receivers in target share with 32% target share. He's also 1st in market share of air yards, but he's 15th in fantasy points per game. He's been pretty efficient and pretty solid in all of his underlying metrics that we look at. 3rd in yards per out run, 3rd in yard per team pass attempt, and 8th in yard per target. While Deebo Samuel is dealing with some minor injuries, Aiyuk should continue to see more and more opportunities and thrive with Brock Purdy as the quarterback. 49ers also have the 12th easiest remaining schedule for wide receivers, so that is also a positive. But Brandon Aiyuk could end up being a top 12 wide receiver by the season's end, and I just don't think it's going to cost you that kind of opportunity cost to be able to acquire him right now. Now, speaking of a wide receiver that has played well to a wide receiver that has just been terrible, and that's T. Higgins. In 5 games, he has 14 catches, 149 yards, and 2 touchdowns. His week 6 wasn't any better. 2 catches for 20 yards. He only played 56% of the snaps with a 12% target share and a 54% catchable target rate, which is really, really bad. Speaking of bad, he's 77th in yards per route run, 75th in yards per team pass attempt, and 58th in fantasy points per game. But the week 7 bye should allow time for T. Higgins to get more rest and rest up and get those ribs back in order. And also Joe Burrow, also a little bit more time to get more and more healthy. Now, the good news is the Bengals have the 5th easiest remaining schedule rest of season for wide receivers. And we know T. Higgins, when healthy, and this Bengals offense and this Bengals passing game is elite when everything is right. And I think this bye week is coming at a better time to get everybody healthy and on the same page. And T. Higgins at wide receiver 63, because he could easily finish as a top 24 wide receiver rest of season. And again, opportunity cost here. You didn't pay the draft capital for him. I think he's somebody you can easily buy much cheaper on pennies on the dollar, considering how bad he's been, because whoever owns him is probably fed up with T. Higgins at this point. So he is somebody that I would definitely be looking to go out and try to acquire. Next up, let's talk about DK Metcalf. Struggles continued in week 6. It's not all his fault, as Geno Smith has regressed quite a bit. Week 6, he did see 10 targets and 143 air yards. He also saw 3 end zone targets. So this day could have been a lot better than what it was, but he just didn't get there. He is still 25th in yards per route run, 11th in yards per target, and 20th in yards per team pass attempt. DK Metcalf is wide receiver 36 on the season, but we know how good DK Metcalf is, and I'm buying him in the second half of the season of really trying to figure this thing out rest of season. Next up, let's talk about Nico Collins. He is wide receiver 11, but it's Nico Collins. He doesn't carry the same sort of name recognition as a lot of other wide receivers do. Now, why I want to, even if I have to pay a little bit more to get him, there is a lot to like here within his profile. 4th in yards per route run, 5th in yards after the catch, 3rd in yards per reception, 11th in yards per team pass attempt, and 13th in fantasy points per game. Nico Collins has been excellent this year. Now, the other good news is the Texans have the fourth easiest remaining schedule for wide receivers. And also, I will mention that Tank Dell is also a buy. You could probably even buy him even cheaper than Nico Collins. But Nico Collins has been very, very good. Though I'll say over the last couple of weeks, it hasn't been as good. But he's now put up back to back sub top 24 weeks. And so if people think that he's falling off or it was kind of a fluke, I don't think that it was. Every other number is not pointing in that direction. And CJ Stroud has been fantastic. So Nico Collins, easy buy for me. Next up, let's talk about Garrett Wilson. Things have looked ugly at times for this Jets offense. However, things are starting to look up. His 32.5% target share is fifth among all wide receivers. He's also 12th in market share of air yards, 10th in deep targets, and third in red zone targets. His 13.5 fantasy points per game ranks 23rd, but his 22.8 expected fantasy points is ninth among all wide receivers. His remaining schedule is also very nice with upcoming games against the Giants, Chargers, Raiders, Bills, and Dolphins. So better days are coming for Garrett Wilson. Lastly, let's talk about Rashee Rice, wide receiver 48. He played 50% of the snaps last Thursday, but with 11% target share. But he has put up double-digit PPR points in 4 of the 6 weeks. Justin Watson is set to miss multiple weeks with an arm injury. He was also playing 50% of the snaps and saw about a 10% target share within this offense. So those targets, I definitely think, could flow more to Rashee Rice, who is clearly the most dynamic wide receiver and should get more and more involved within this offense as the season goes on. Oh, yeah, the Chiefs have the second easiest remaining schedule for wide receivers. So Rashee Rice, wide receiver 48, again, not a player who's going to cost you a lot to acquire, but I think the sky is the limit for him over the second half of the season and could be a guy who really wins people some leagues. So Rashee Rice is a player that I'm definitely looking to buy. Lastly, I just want to hit on a couple players that I think you could look to sell heading into week 7. So one is Kenneth Walker. His numbers, while have been very solid for a running back, his rest of season schedule is absolutely dreadful. Over the last half of the season, they actually have the hardest remaining schedule for running backs, and especially their fantasy playoff schedule is absolutely brutal to finish out the season. 14, you're talking about San Francisco. Week 15 is Philadelphia. Week 16 is at Tennessee. And week 17 is Pittsburgh. I mean, they have one of the worst rest of season schedules for running backs. And Kenneth Walker, while has pretty much been getting there through his touchdown numbers, and I do expect some aggression coming in that department. And so I do think Kenneth Walker is somebody you could look to sell. Derrick Henry really worries me because he is going to be game script dependent once again. And yet again, Tajay Spears outsnapped Derrick Henry 56 to 53%. And I just don't think Tajay Spears' role is going away. Now, I will say the Titans have the easiest remaining schedule for running back, so that is something to keep in mind. But I am very worried about Derrick Henry and the involvement of Tajay Spears, and they're continually playing from behind and game scripting Derrick Henry out. So Derrick Henry and Kenneth Walker are two running backs that I really have no problem with selling. Next up, you could talk about guys like Adam Thielen. While he's definitely been absolutely elite, I just don't think you continue to expect he's going to see a 37% target share rest of season. He's been the wide receiver 3 in PPR formats, and I am definitely looking to cash out now because I think you could actually get quite a bit for him. And so Adam Thielen would be another player you could look to sell. Lastly, George Pickens would be another player with Deontay Johnson coming back. I do think that is going to really affect George Pickens. I mean, he's had a 32% target share over the time that he has been out. That Deontay Johnson has missed, but Deontay Johnson is expected to return here very soon. So that does worry me for George Pickens over the second half of the season with Deontay coming back, because Matt Canada is a terrible offensive coordinator and has done a terrible job within this offense. And so I think George Pickens should be somebody you should be looking to sell. So with that being said, hit that like and subscribe button for future content. Let me know in the comment section below, what are your thoughts? Who are you looking to buy? Who are you looking to sell? We'll see you on the next one.